In today's session, I am going to be speaking about beauty, functionality, and architecture. And to get today's session started, beauty and function. But let me, I guess, set the scene as to why today's session is necessary. In the previous session, we looked at the importance of architecture from the exterior point of view and how to inspect a property from the outside. In property investing, we always begin from the outside in. In other works of life and in other endeavors, sometimes it's important to consider from the inside out. But the first thing you see in a building is the external envelope, the architecture, its form. And that ties in very nicely to the concept of beauty. We begin with the beauty, both externally and internally, and then we try to address the issue about functionality or utility of the space. And what we are trying to do usually as investors is we are trying to bring together beauty and functionality in such a way that you want beauty to always lead and functionality to follow. Whenever you find properties where the functionality of the property leads and the beauty lags or follows, what you tend to find is in the short term, the property will meet the investor's requirements in relation to cash flow. But in the long term, the value of the property will not grow at the same rate as other beautiful properties. I mentioned in the prior session that most of the buildings in Great Britain or in the United Kingdom are period buildings or existing buildings. Period buildings, pre-war, post-war buildings. The ratio of modern buildings or modern architecture to period architecture are not comparable. We have a lot more existing buildings than we have new buildings. As a result of that, what you find is buildings usually that are considered to be very attractive or desirable or beautiful tend to command a long-term premium compared to modern architecture. And in today's session, although I would try to focus on beauty and function, my intention is not necessarily to just talk about the esoteric aspects of beauty or functionality, but to tie it back to your property inspection. We began on the outside. My intention is to bring your viewing experience to the inside and to provide you with some ideas of things to take into account when you're viewing a property internally. But to begin today's session, let me start by saying a few things. Unlike all other art forms, architecture is very different. It's unique. It's unique in that architecture has a way of imposing itself in your visual path without your permission, without any form of apology. And by doing that, architecture compels you, it draws you to look at the building or to look at the property. Now, this means that as a property investor or as someone looking to buy a property, you should take into account how the building makes you feel upon first glance. Unfortunately, in residential property purchases today, what we find is that most people focus more on the interior decor, than they do the exterior. And most people do not focus too much on beauty. So modern interior design has somewhat surpassed architecture, and since the turn of this century, most purchases in Great Britain that are most purchases that are done by less experienced buyers are influenced by the interior design or the interior decor, rather than the inherent architectural beauty of the building. Now, if you are a seller, then certainly the interior design or the interior decor is very, very important in order to maximize the value of the property that you're selling. And therefore, one of the things you have to do as a seller is to tailor the interior decor to your target market. If you are a buyer, you should never focus on the interior decor, no matter how dilapidated or exquisitely furnished the property is. You should instead focus on beauty, first beginning with the exterior beauty, and then the interior beauty. And then once you've gone through this first stage, the next stage is to look at the utility or the functionality of the spaces. The decision that you will be making on which you consider to be more important, I genuinely leave that to you because it's a personal choice. I believe, however, that from a long-term investment perspective, that beauty should be preeminent. And let me give you a useful example. In certain parts of London, you might find newly developed residential tower blocks or residential block of medium to high rise developments. These buildings sell for very, very attractive prices. As a matter of fact, maybe this particular building is located in close proximity to a traditional Victorian building. And you might find, for example, if this is a two-bedroom flat, let's say in Fulham, it will be on the market for maybe £950,000, whereas a two-bedroom flat on the same street might be on the market for maybe £900,000. What tends to happen is that most people are attracted to very, very shiny things, new architecture, new furnishing, whereas the existing building is somewhat dated. And although the interior can be enhanced, what tends to happen is most buyers, especially first-time buyers, are drawn to the new building. However, over a 30-year period, the period building will be a better purchase than the modern building. What tends to happen is you might find that period buildings, because these buildings are positioned on streets that have conservation protection, or there are barriers to entry, perhaps lack of land, or uniformity of architecture, most people, both foreign and domestic buyers, would always be drawn to properties that are on a street. And therefore, buildings like this have a wide range of attractive potential buyers or suitors, whereas Apartment buildings tend to be more selected by young people or people of a certain preferential type. You might find that over a 30-year period or over a 10-year period, the property prices of both buildings, this might grow at a 7% annualized compounded growth rate, whereas the new building might grow at the rate of perhaps 4%. It's no different to any skyline in any major city. You always find a building that is a high-rise building or a medium-rise building that looks dated. It looks out of place. But just remember that perhaps 20 years prior, it was maybe the exotic property on the block. But 20 years later, that architectural style has faded. And what happens is people just go back to the same architectural designs that have always stood the test of time, which in the UK are period buildings. So keep that in mind. It's a personal choice on whether beauty takes priority over utility and function, or vice versa. But recognize that beauty is something to be felt. It's not only something that you see and observe. The features of a building that espouse its beauty are usually integral to its design, to its form, to its layout. Let me give you some examples. Georgian buildings are known to be classically superior for a number of reasons: symmetry, form, and simplicity. They're simple. They're designed to be simple. Gable roof, chimneys in nice positions, and windows that are symmetrical, usually large windows, and the entrance door usually centered. So in relation to beauty, the design, form, and layout is what dictates how beautiful the property is from the outside. But as you walk into the inside, the things such as the staircase, the fireplaces, the floor-to-ceiling height, bay windows, the ornaments, the cornice in the ceiling, all of these intricate details is what makes a property beautiful. In addition to that, the positions of the windows, the views from the inside, and much more. So the reason I'm explaining this is just so you understand that the features of a building that espouse its beauty are usually integral to its design, its form, its layout. The building's exterior architecture and its interior features, such as the ones I described, play a huge role in the overall beauty of the property. In addition to that, the external surrounding, the views, whether you have mountains or whether you have a body of water, a lake or a sea, all of that makes a building beautiful. The interior decor, on the other hand, tends to enhance or optimize the existing beauty of the property, or to conceal the lack of beauty in the property. So for example, you might find that a building that has been poorly designed, it's possible for you to do some internal cosmetics using plasterboard, using some, ironmongery detailing, using, beautiful carpentry work. You can make the internal space much more attractive. You can make the internal space more attractive by installing a nice bathroom, a nice kitchen, perhaps a non-functional fireplace. All of those are what we call the interior decor. They enhance, they optimize the existing beauty, or they conceal the lack of beauty in the property. Now, these interior features will vary depending on the property you're looking at. So always keep in mind that when you're viewing a property, do not focus too much on the interior decor, because all of those items can be easily replaced. Things such as, very generous floor to ceiling heights cannot be easily replaced. Original fireplaces cannot be easily replaced. The view out of the property through the windows cannot be easily replaced. Maybe even going as far as the interconnection between the spaces, the flow from one part of the property to another, the connection between rooms, the connection between the common area or the communal area and the rest of the building. All of those cannot be easily replicated because architecture is fixed. And for that reason, it's always important to keep in mind that beauty, especially the exterior beauty and then the interior beauty, are more important than the interior decor. Now, I've said this in the prior sessions. So having said that, let me move on to what your tasks should be when you're viewing the outside or the inside of a building. Now, your first task when you're outside or inside the building is to observe. Your first task is to observe and feel. Observe and feel the beauty or the ugliness in the property. Make a visual observation of your initial reaction, your initial impression of the space. Capture such impressions in writing. Write it down. Put that in a notepad. Take pictures of the aspects of the property that hold your attention. Similar to when you meet someone for the first time that you find attractive. There are things about the person. It could be the person's swag, how they walk, their hair, their eyes, their smile, their presence, their voice, the pitch, the tone, how they enunciate their words. All of these things are things you notice when you meet someone for the first time. And at that particular time, you're drawing an impression, the first time impression of the person. Similarly, when you view a building, try to capture your initial impression in writing. Whilst you capture how the building impresses itself on you, always keep in mind that even if the building has very beautiful interior features, the furnitures, the fittings, the equipment, the detailing, the ironmongery, the joinery, although it might have all of those beautiful items, in some cases, not in all cases, but in some cases, such items may not be included in the sale agreement. So don't get carried away believing that the state in which you saw the property during your inspection will be what you would have when the property is yours. Most of the time, the seller leaves with all of their personal items. And you walk into a property when the property is yours and it's an empty shell. So always imagine what the property would look like as an empty shell. Now, your first task when you're outside or inside of the building, like I said, is to observe and feel the beauty or the ugliness in the property. My recommendation is, if you feel a building to be ugly, no matter how tempting and no matter how tempted you are to proceed with the sale, even if the property is available at a discount, always keep in mind your exit strategy. And keep in mind that if you find a property to be unattractive, then there's a possibility that other people will also find the same property to be unattractive. So keep that in mind. Now, whilst you're making your visual observations of the property, I guess going back to the statement I made about ugliness, I know most people might think beauty is in the eye of the beholder. A statement or a phrase which many people believe in, but there is an objective standard to beauty, and there is a subjective standard to beauty. Beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder is a subjective position. But in reality, buildings can be objectively classified as beautiful or ugly. So keep in mind that in the UK we have hundreds and hundreds of years of building architecture and design, and so there is a general consensus on the types of buildings that are considered to be beautiful. Now, because the future doesn't exist, yet. So, in choosing a property to buy, you have to be applying an objective standard, not your subjective standards. The objective standards you apply should transcend your taste, they should transcend your opinions, and instead, what you're hoping to do is think about what society as a collective, what we consider to be beautiful in buildings. By doing this initial, you might say, agnostic analysis, you position yourself to be able to maximize the future potential of your investment. Now, I know that, and I accept that there are differences in taste. I know that there are differences in our preferences. But I would also say that I believe that is wrong to believe that all tastes are equal. In the same way that not all building designs are equal. There are some buildings that are more beautiful than others, and there are some that are less beautiful than others. For example, St. Paul's Cathedral is a beautiful building. It's internationally recognized as a beautiful building. We all can agree that St. Paul's Cathedral is a much, much more attractive visual site than a construction waste site. That's simply, whilst the construction waste site could be subjectively beautiful to someone, on an objective basis, the consensus would be that St. Paul's Cathedral is a much more attractive building. Now, I share that simply because in Great Britain, what we have seen in the last half a century has been a demand for housing. And as a result of that, we've seen at an increasing pace a lot of modern architecture. Unfortunately, most people have been buying new buildings at prices that might seem attractive in the present, but because the architecture and the beauty of the building are below standard, when the time comes in the future for those buildings to be sold, most of the owners will unfortunately have to sell the buildings at a price slightly below what an equally attractive building in the local neighborhood will sell for. As an intelligent investor, It's always important to remain sensitive to beauty, and just consider beauty in all of your purchase decisions. Generally, in architecture, beauty and function have a connection. There is an interconnection between beauty and function. However, functionality or utility should always follow beauty and not the other way around. Now, in parts of central London, one of the things that is observable are buildings, for example, churches, period office buildings that are very, very beautiful, but they have been easily converted to residential apartments with the original architecture maintained. So a building that may have been used as a church has now been converted to residential flats. So what you find is a very beautiful building on the outside, but equally as you come inside, you find a beautiful interior. The reason for the easy conversion has to do with the beauty of the building, because people generally want to be around works of art that have an impact on our mood, our sense of communalness, that have an impact on our well-being, that have an impact on our gratitude and how we feel about the universe, nature, the environment, and our surrounding. And that's one of the things beauty does. Original architecture that are beautiful have a way of being retained. Unfortunately, you cannot say the same thing about buildings, modern buildings that were designed without thinking about the sustainability or the beauty in the long term. Generally, most architects do not take into account what it would be like to live with the building 30, 40 years from now. And what you tend to find is such buildings, after a certain period of time, they become ghost towns. They become ghost buildings because a lot of people do not want to be around such buildings. People tend to go to areas where there is more beauty. There are so many parts of England where you have ghost cities and ghost parts of the town. Fancy buildings that were designed under modern architecture with no consideration for how the building will fit into the original township. And as a result of that, 30, 40 years later, such areas are deserted. So keep that in mind, because you might be considering the possibility of buying, one of those shiny new buildings in some parts in town or remote from town. And in 20 years, you might find that because such buildings were designed with, grand master plans and using landscape architects and planning consultants, very few people considered whether people would really want to live there in the long run. And it's not unusual to find that there are some parts of our societies and our towns where the value of properties in a particular location are going down, whilst the value of other properties in maybe an adjacent, not too far of a distance, the properties are going up. All of that has to do with the importance of recognizing that beauty matters. Beauty matters in our lives. Now, once you've carried out everything that I've shared so far, the next step will be to focus on going inside the property and doing what I call a utilitarian analysis of the inside of the property. Once you've completed your appraisal of the beauty of the exterior and the beauty of the interior, then you can proceed with the utility functions of each space. And that's what I will consider in the next session. I will go through a non-exhaustive list of things to consider for your internal inspection. I hope today's session has been useful.